Hello and welcome to my podcast. All right, Sam, do me a favor, subscribe to the Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in, and you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now about how the slow starts have contributed to another slow start to the season for the Washington Commanders. And as you can see, to my side is Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. And shout out Mary Fortier for tuning in. Anyway, Sam, thanks for joining me. Sam always likes when I do my little intro. So
people didn't see, but before this, I don't know if people know this, but a lot of NFL players use smelling salts on the sidelines before games where they get really amped up. You know, you'll see like right before the first drive, a lot of offensive linemen doing smelling salts. And it felt like that's what Keim did the first time he did this intro. Is hello and welcome to my podcast.
I came in hot. I was a little bit fired up. You know, when you have a good guest, you get fired up, and sometimes when I have you, I get fired up too. So,
All right, fair.
All right, let's go. So today we're taping this on Wednesday, first day back at the facility, and we talked to Ron Rivera and we asked him about, are there any potential changes that could take place on the offensive line, which has had some issues. Not all the issues are their fault. Not all the sacks are their fault. We already know that Sadiq Charles, he's got the calf injury, not expecting him to go. So you would expect Chris Paul to go in there. Any other changes that basically Ron Rivera told us, you know, they're open to anything essentially. So what was your take after talking to him? What were your thoughts about that?
If you listen to his words and you watch the film, I would probably expect a new center on Sunday. Nick Gates did not play very well, and he was pretty distraught after the game, had his head in his hands for a while. I went up to him and said, hey, do you want to talk? And he ultimately did talk later, but he was like, if you're going to report anything, just say I got my ass kicked. So I think that he knows that he played pretty poorly, and so I would expect to see someone new in there, whether that's Ricky Stromberg or Tyler Larson, the veteran. I think that's, you know, kind of remains to be seen. I would probably expect it to be Larson, who's more veteran. And we can get into the draft class implications of not starting Ricky Stromberg, your third round pick at center, if that's the way they do ultimately go. And like you said, Sadiq Charles will probably be out. So I think we'll see either Stromberg or Chris Paul. But I mean, I don't think that these names are what's going to fix this team. I don't think that's the inspiring thing, but you know, logistically, I think that's just the way it's going to go.
And I would think, based on what they're going through now, that you'd want to get a veteran center out there, Tyler Larson. And that's what, you know, they played well with him in the past. And I think with some of the stuff that teams are throwing at them up front, but you got something to say.
Well, just Ron Rivera always talks about his record with Tyler Larson. And I'm not saying that Tyler Larson's a bad player by any means, but I think that had a lot to do with circumstance more than it did.
Of course. Of course. Listen, let's not, you know, we're not talking about a Pro Bowl center here,
right.
But if you're going to, you know, if you're going to have some issues, I could see them going with the veteran first. And then it depends on with Stromberg. I actually have liked Stromberg at guard in terms of the awareness he plays with. I don't know if he's ready for a starting job at that point. The offense changes a little bit. I think Sadiq moves a little bit better than Chris Paul, but maybe you get a little bit more power with the run game with both those two. And so the other part, the interesting part too, the Nick Gates thing, as you said after the game, when we're in the locker room today, he's usually very present in there. And today he was not. So, and he was in there, he popped in there, but then he was out of there pretty quickly. So I think that's another sign of something going on. But what does it say? If it's not Stromberg, what does it say about that draft?
Well, the first round pick would be benched. The second round pick would be on the field in a limited capacity. They feel like they would have had to compensate for him. The third round pick would be not a starter or even a backup at center or guard. The fourth round pick is on IR. The fifth round pick is inactive every week. The sixth round pick gets a few carries and got a few carries last week, but it's not like he's a world beater. And the seventh round pick plays special teams only, which to me is an absolutely disastrous draft class.
So far it is. And obviously with the draft class, it takes a few years. We know that. So maybe Forbes gets it. Martin, in the few plays he had last week, has looked better, but still you need more impact from a draft class. And the funny thing is, it could be the one guy who impacts it most might be Rodriguez down the road. Chris Rodriguez. I mean, I like that kid, but but you're still talking about draft class where you're not getting enough from in a team that needs more. Like if you were 5-2 and you're the 49ers and you're finding it hard to play young guys, that's one thing, but this is a team that needed more from the draft class.
And it's also a front office staff that knew going into the draft, oh, there's probably going to be a sale. Oh, we are probably going to be coaching and drafting for our jobs. And you got a draft class that is like one of the least productive, one of the least played draft classes in the entire league. And it's not like they're a good team. And so it's a real, I think, indictment on the personnel staff, the front office, the decision-making that they had. And obviously, Forbes could be something someday, he could be a real guy. I'm not ruling that out, or any of these guys could be, like you said, but it's just not the timeline that this team needed contributions on.
Well, especially when you look at two of the free agent signings, Nick Gates and Andrew Wiley. And if those guys were doing great, you'd say, okay, well, I understand this, but that's not what's developed.
The frustration with that for me is that it was eminently foreseeable that those guys were not going to come in and fix your offensive line. In fact, I did a whole story in the preseason about all the people who did foresee this. I talked to, I want to say like 3 scouts and 2 senior personnel executives of different teams. I talked to Brandon Thorne, who does a great job with the Trench Warfare newsletter, breaking down offensive line play. Seth Walder, who works at your place, he does analytics on offensive line, the pass block, run block, win rates. Every single person who looked at this offensive line out of the building, it felt like, said, hey, the offensive line's a concern, and I don't think the guys they brought in were very good, or that they were not going to elevate this line. I mean, the way that Brandon Thorne put it to me is Washington is betting on Andrew Wiley to play the best he's ever played. Like, he was the 5th best offensive lineman in Kansas City. They're betting on him to be the 2nd or 3rd best one here. And so it's just the process is so suspect. And the bets that they made, I know Eric Bieniemy had influence on bringing in Andrew Wiley, but the fact that this offensive line is not, and I think they were playing a little bit better than people gave them credit for, because Sam was holding the ball and taking sacks. And I still think they are a tiny bit better than people probably give them credit for, but like the struggles that they're having were entirely foreseeable. And it's mind boggling to me that we're at this point.
Well, and I think it's also, I think you look at, and I've talked about this before, if you're going to have a young quarterback, you've got to build a strong line, because it's probably going to take him a minute to adjust to. And because that was one of the knocks on him in college, that he held the ball a little bit. So if you know that, you got to build a stronger wall around him. And I'll be honest, like I thought at nothing else, like, well, you look at guard, like, well, they should be better than the guy like Trey Turner and Andrew Norwell. And you thought, well, if Nick Gates can be steady, it gives them a steadiness at a position where they haven't had it for a couple of years. But it is not worked out. And I didn't think they're going to be this world beater, but I also thought the combination might be better. But then certainly in hindsight, even at the time, I worried that, did you build a strong enough wall up front to protect this kid and give him the time he needs?
Yeah. And I will say that he did hold the ball a lot in college. Like the NFL college football average for quarterbacks in terms of sack rate is like 6%. And he's always been at 8% or higher. That's always been a big part of his game. But okay, so you didn't build a great offensive line, and you have a quarterback who has that problem. I think then the solution would be, okay, like we can mitigate some of these problems by running the ball. And they haven't done that either. Right. So it really feels like a bad combination of, we didn't build this thing to maximize our talent, but we're still going to play a certain style. And that to me, it's there's a lot of layers here. But none of them really add up, because it doesn't feel like everybody is on the same page in terms of what they have and what they need to do to execute with what they have.
I think Sunday was a prime example, that first half versus the second half, the things that Terry McLaurin was talking about what he wanted to see earlier, what you watched the Giants do with a far worse on paper offensive line, and how they manipulated what their game plan to adapt to all that. I think all of that, it kind of, to me, highlighted some of those issues too. So, I don't know, did anything like that jump out to you? Did you?
Yeah. I mean, like, I know that it seems like fans want him to roll out more. And Sam Halleck actually kind of talked about that today, saying that you have to get specific looks and you can't do it all the time. It's, you can't spam that button, because then it becomes less effective. But I think that if you want to dig on play action, or if you want to dig on Sam's comfortability under center, or some of those different looks that they can give teams that they're not giving them super regularly, I think those are things that you can point out and say, hey, why aren't you doing that more? Why aren't you running the ball more? And even when the defense is keeping games within one score, because for a long time, that was the thing that Eric Bieniemy could lean on, right? Is, hey, like, we're down 2 or 3 scores almost immediately. I can't run the ball. But now that there have been some of those score neutral situations, you're seeing him just show a clear preference for pass, which is fine. If you have the tools to do it, but you clearly don't, whether it be the line, whether it be the quarterback. And, I think that the receivers are not getting open at the rate that people would like them to. So, I mean, you're just not adapting to the game circumstances at the rate that you need to have a successful offense. And when your defense is playing a little bit better, albeit against worse competition, it's a maddening, combination of factors that are going to lead to embarrassing losses.
And I think part of the problem that I have with the run game is not so I think clearly you would need to do it a little bit more. Problem is they're not doing it well when they're doing it. And so and you'll like this. So on first drives of the game, first drives of the game. So on the first drive, right. On the first drive of a game though, this team ranks next to last in yards per carry. It's 2.7 on the first drive of the game. So you want to come out and try and establish it, and you can't. Now, part of it is it's always an inside gun handoff on the first play. So shocker, right?
Yeah, I can't remember if you did or Nikki did, but
Nikki did it.
Went back and looked and was like, in the 7 games, they've done that 5 or 6 times.
I mean, and so that to me is a problem too, is that it's the effectiveness of the runs is not there. And that's why I wonder if a guy like Chris Rodriguez starts to get a little bit more carries, because I think he fits a little bit more of the style right now, because I think he's a little bit more used to what they're asking him to do. I don't know that that's the answer, because I think sometimes you can look at, is it the run game design? I'm not smart enough to go deep into that, but you wonder about all that, because when Brian Robinson runs it right, is he getting a hole to run through? Well, on the touchdown, he did. They did a good job of creating gaps through alignment of the play. You don't see enough of that, right? And so that's one of the things I wonder about too. But one of the things too, and I want to get into the trade deadline in a few minutes, because that's coming up, and I want to get your thoughts on that. But sticking with the offensive theme, and early in games, Terry McLaurin, and he was very vocal for him, very vocal after the game. And listen, the guy said what he said. If anybody else says it in a different way, it's a headline. He says it in a very diplomatic way that gets a point across without creating it's a masterful skill. But anyways, that's what he did. Do you think anything changes based on what he said Sunday?
I mean, that's one of the most interesting questions, right? Is how much influence does Terry McLaurin have as their highest paid skill player, as one of their best players on offense, if not the best player on offense? I mean, he is seeing things on the field, and clearly he's making recommendations. He said, I don't know if you covered this in a previous podcast, but he said, when we're facing pressure like that, we need to go down the field. We need to exploit, the edges. We need to take shots, because that's when they're weaker and that's when they're vulnerable. And if you hit a couple of those, like they did, safeties can't play 10 to 12 yards from the ball, and they have to, play a little softer and respect your downfield game a little bit more. So, I mean, Terry McLaurin, I think, is a pretty smart guy. I think he's seeing on the field and he's making recommendations. Will Eric Bieniemy adapt to that? Will he? And I don't think it's just about touches for Terry McLaurin, which is where Washington benefits. It's not just this soft power articulating, like, hey, like, I'm going to tell you what I'm upset about, but I'm not going to do it in a way that creates headlines or gets viral videos, like you said. But I think he really does have some solid ideas for how can this offense be more effective. And I'm curious to see if Eric Bieniemy incorporates that.
And I believe he is too. So, but I will say, like, the one thing Terry also understands is his importance to this team. He's very aware, but it's not in an arrogant way. He understands guys come up to him and say, hey, we need you to make a play. And the response is like, you can't call your own play. You can't throw it to him. You can't call it for yourself, but he understands what he means to everybody else. So he understands, like, that if he's getting the ball a ton, it's probably not good for the offense, because others need to be involved. But if you're not getting it at all, it's horrible for the offense.
To me, Terry saying that, and John Allen's quote about, I'm tired of this stuff for the last 7 years.
Now, wait a minute. What did he say? I'm tired of this stuff.
Well, listen, it's a family-friendly podcast. If my mom listens to this, shout out to my mom. I don't want her to be, upset. But I mean, here's the thing. Those two guys acting the way that they have, I think that they're getting deja vu. And I can't blame them, because if you look at it, so Ron Rivera, every year that he's been in Washington, all 4 seasons, in the first 7 games, they've won 2 or 3. They go on a mid-season surge where they win like 4 of 6, 4 of 5. They put themselves like in the playoff picture, and then ultimately they've fallen short. The last 2 or 3 games, they've gone 1 and 3 or 1 and 2 over the last 3 or 4 games every year. 2020, obviously, the NFC East faltered more and they made the playoffs. But that is, it feels like I am watching the same movie over and over and over again.
You have no idea, my man.
Right. This is my 4th season on the beat, not 34th. But it feels like the Ron Rivera era has stuck to the same script every year. And I think that those guys are feeling that.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why they're speaking up in the ways that they are right now.
And I also think for a lot of these guys too, like this was as hard a camp as they've had in a while. You want to see that payoff. You need to see that payoff for you to maintain your belief in that things are going the right way. And I will say, I think Sunday's a big game for a lot of this. Is how do you come back from that? And I know a lot of you can say it's over, it's a wrap. Players don't think them like that.
And I would also say, like, this is maybe a little bit big brain, a little bit galaxy brain or whatever, but like the NFL is so, do you know that phrase, galaxy brain?
It's never been applied to me, so I don't
know. No, it's like an internet like meme, like going galaxy brain, like
okay, yeah.
Okay.
Just make your point.
Yeah. Okay. The NFL last year had its like most successful year ever in terms of parity, what the NFL proudly calls competitive balance. The average margin of victory was like 9.13 points per game, which was the lowest it'd been since 1932. There are more 4th quarter comebacks. Games are, within 1 score in the 4th quarter all the time. And so like basically what I'm trying to say is that the margin between the top and the bottom is thinner than ever. So like, yeah, I know people want to say it's 3 and 4, you lost to the Giants, like it's over. But I would say that Ron Rivera's history here, the state of the league, like everything points to a classic Ron Rivera finish of like, they're going to stay in this, because even if they lose on Sunday, the furthest out they can be statistically from the number 7 seed. I know it's probably early to look at that, but it's 1.5 games. Like there's a huge clump of teams that are basically between like, 11 and 6 in this conference. And so like they can lose, and I still don't think the season's over. But obviously, you want to win to give guys belief and hope. I think that's more critical.
I think that's where it's critical. And it's also you can look at the second half of the schedule. It's a lot harder. So that's part of the bottom line too. When I look at it, it's like, does this schedule set up to give you that sort of a second half push? But you're right. Like after 7 games, God, what was the record? I want to say it was at like 7 and I think like 7 or 8 and 14 or something like that after, I guess it'd be 21 games. Right. So yes, I think it was like the record under Ron Rivera after 7 games combined over the last 3 years. It's like, it's not very good, but from thereafter, it's over 500. So
it's something like his winning percentage in the first 7 weeks is like 450, and his winning percentage after that is like 580.
Right. So that is part of the equation. However, you need to show, you have to give proof that this is going to turn around. Things turn around really weird in the NFL, and you never know. But that leads us to the next. Well, actually, one last thing on this with Terry, because one of the things, and I talked to him last week about this as part of a story, and also threw on the podcast a little interview about like, where are you getting at with McLaurin, with Sam Howell? Are you at the point now where you can, where you're developing a different rhythm in the pass game because you're getting to know each other? And there were a couple of plays in the Atlanta game that showed it. But then you look at Sunday, the Giants game, that 3rd down where that he and Sam were not on the same page. And I think, and one of the things that Terry talked about today was, can they needing to get to the point where, yes, like that's not, because he was talking to Howell on the sidelines after the game, getting to the point where you guys see the coverage, and even though it doesn't run the play called, you're going to adjust on the fly. So like Terry runs a back shoulder because that's where the leverage is, and Sam throws to the corner because that's where the play was. So like that's also like that's an advanced stage. And I think for McLaurin, God, it also speaks, Sam, to hit that guy's need to play with, just strong quarterback play. Like what could he do with a strong quarterback play? Not that Sam can't give it to him. We don't, there's still time to go there, but like, what I'm saying? Like how desperately that guy wants to have that connection with a quarterback,
That play, I think, feels like a real microcosm of Ron Rivera said, we want to build up the roster. for a young quarterback, because that's the bet that we're making. And I don't think that was a bad bet, particularly like considering how things went with Carson Wentz and it, how things look in New Orleans with Derek Carr. Like, I don't think bringing in another veteran was the answer, but it's those types of plays. It's like, that is such a microcosm of the struggles and the frustrations that a receiver can have after years and years of this. And yeah, I think everybody would like to see him, reach his full potential and capability with a good quarterback. And I know that, Terry got a bag, which was really nice. And he has financial security forever now. But just as a competitor, like as a player, it's tough. And just as a person who likes football a lot, it's tough to see him not be able to unlock his full capabilities.
And my only point is should have said is his desire to have that kind of connection and develop that kind of connection. I think if he sees he's developing with Howell, I think he'll be in a good shape for the future because he's only 28 years old. Last topic, trade deadline. So, there are 3 and 4 going in this game. We all know that, the guys are going to draw the most interest are Montez Sweat and Chase Young. And, I know like there's all names out there, but you're not going to trade a lot of these guys. You're just not. It doesn't go like that.
The only other option, and I know it might not be on the table, but I've seen Cleveland columnists banging the table, is Jacoby Brissett.
Correct.
Because of how the Deshaun Watson situation is unfolding.
And he knows that the Cleveland media fans are calling for him. He certainly has no comment on it. My only thing on that would be, and I know like, yeah, okay, first of all, teams don't do other teams favors. So if you think you still need the guy, you're going to keep him. I will say, I think for Sam Howell's development, you want Jacoby Brissett here. Doesn't matter. This is about, for him, off the field, having a veteran presence to talk to. I think for his development, it's very important to have a guy like that here. I don't know that you're going to get anything for him that.
Well, I was going to say is like at what price,
right, well, what price? And I think, listen, if they say, we'll give you a 4th round pick, well, how do you not listen? Right, and because it's also, because the key here too is, this is where this franchise is in a weird spot, because you have a staff that still, you lose, you're desperate to win now. But then you have an owner, it's like, wait a minute, you got to do what's best for the franchise, whether that's short or long term. And I think that's the thing that's going to be interesting here. What constitutes, a good long-term view of this? So if there's again, the guys who bring the value, Chase and Montez, and I know Nick, you reported that there was an offer for Montez. Even like as of a day or two ago, there were no offers for either one, but there was interest. There were calls about them, and there have been calls about these guys for a long time. So what would constitute for you good value at the deadline if they get to 3 and 5 for one of those guys? And what?
So I wrote yesterday the cases for and against trading these guys, and
I meant to plug that.
No, all good. And I think the case for trading one of them is basically like, it's not like you're losing a valuable part of an elite defense. I mean, this defense is 25th in EPA, 28th in scoring. And so like, and you've had 798 snaps in the last 4 years of Sweat, Allen, Payne, and Young together. And the results are undeniably underwhelming. Yeah. Even though the case against trading them is that Montez Sweat looks really good and he's on pace for a career high sacks, which would be 13. Chase Young had 2 sacks on Sunday. He looks like he might be past his knee injury, and his ceiling, I think, is still, could be relatively high, and you don't know what it is. So I think, briefly, those are the cases for and against. I canvassed the market of what they think those offers would be. I talked to 2 senior personnel executives with NFC teams and who are not trying to trade for these guys, so that, they're not inflating or trying to tank the market. But basically, one of them told me that he thinks that most offers would come in 4th, 5th round pick, a 3rd at absolute best. Right. One of them told me that he could see a 2nd for Sweat. But they don't see, like, in the last few years, the only splash edge rusher we've seen move was actually last year when Denver traded Bradley Chubb to Miami for a 1st, a 4th. They threw a running back in, and then they got Chubb in a 5th. But Miami wasn't trading those assets for a half season of Chubb, because days later they signed him to a 5-year, $110 million deal. One of the executives told me that he could not see teams committing to Sweat or Young long term. Right away anyway. So that's going to diminish the return. And I know that fans might be like, a 3rd or 4th or a 5th, like, that's crazy. And we can get into the comp pick discussion if you'd like. But basically, like, I see, if you can get a 3rd round pick for one of those guys, I think that's good value.
Well, and I think the reason why is because you're going to get a third round pick, possibly in compensatory picks in 2025. I say possibly because the formula has to work. Now they have so many guys who are free agents. I can't see them not getting a few comp picks in the 2025 draft. But the question would be, do you get a guaranteed third round pick right now or a possible third round pick in 2025? That to me is what it comes down to, because I agree, like you're not going to commit. I mean, that's what I've heard from others as well, which is you're not going to get this great return on these guys. I mean, forget a first round pick. And, you're not, I mean, I don't know why you'd give up anything more than a third for what could be a half year rental. So that's the question. Would you rather have a third in 2024 or a possible third in 2025?
And the third in 2024 would be inherently better because the comp pick is going to be at the end of the third round. The thing that I think people need to be aware of is Washington is projected to have $90+ million in cap room, the fourth most amount of cap room. And if you have a new GM next year, you're going to be spending like crazy. And I don't want to dig all the way into the weeds, but basically, like if you go out and you spend a bunch of money, yes, Montez Sweat or Chase Young could be worth a third round comp pick. But if you sign someone at that level, they can cancel out or they can diminish the value of the comp pick. So if basically I was talking to Nick Corte, who's the comp pick analyst at Over the Cap, and he was just saying it's almost impossible to bet on getting a third comp pick when you look at Washington's situation. He was like, to me, if you can lock in a third rounder in 2024, that's the smart move, because you can play the compensatory pick game, but there's a lot of things you can't control: percentage of snaps, how much people will pay for other guys. So yeah, like a third round pick comp pick is possible, but it's far from guaranteed.
And I think one thing to keep in mind too, that Josh Harris is very big on analytics. I would guarantee that all the stuff you just said is how they're going to look at it too, because that's how he operates. And so, I don't think he's going to go in there and tell Ron Rivera, you guys got to do this, this, and this. I think it's going to be, if you're 3-5, you owe it to the franchise to explore these deals and see what you can get. And, I would not trade both these guys, but if it's 3-5, then I'm going to look and see what you can get for the same reasons that you said.
Yeah. And the number one argument against trading both of them is like, it's hard to get players who have their potential, who have their physicality, right? Like number 2 picks don't happen all the time. But yeah, to your point about Josh Harris, I think that Ron Rivera failing to explore the trade market fully or not pulling the trigger on a good deal just cast doubt on your judgment even more. So even though Ron is incentivized to keep the most amount of talent he can, he needs to do a good job canvassing this market and making the right decision, because I think that we both would agree that it's a long shot that Ron is here next year, or that this regime is here next year. I don't want to speak for you.
It's not trending. I mean, the record's going to be the dictator, and the record's not trending the right way.
Right. But I think that if he were to do something, I don't think that he would, but if he were to do something like that, then that's going to be a mark against him as well.
Correct. I think right now you have to take the approach is what's the best thing for the franchise, because what if you go 3-5, let's say you're 3-5. You make the trade. Let's say you trade Montez Sweat for a third round pick, and then you somehow start to play well for whatever reason, things just start to click. Well, then if you're Josh Harris, you can say, okay, you got this young quarterback that was your guy, and Sam Howell looks good. And you did, at a time where you could have done the wrong thing for the franchise, you did the right thing. You put it up, you know what I mean? Like you would take all that into consideration. Now we may be going down this fairy tale road to think that it would happen, but you don't know what happens, right? But if you're Josh Harris, you're going to analyze it from every angle like that. And I think that's the way to go. And I think, so you owe it to the franchise to check, because to me, the number one question you always ask if you're in charge, what's the best move for the franchise? Is it getting rid of Sam Mills that time? Is it changing the offensive coordinators? Well, the answers to those things were yes. And so the same rule of logic applies here. And if you're Josh Harris, you're going to, if nothing else, you let them know, like you need to at least explore to see what's out there.
Yeah.
So there, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I mean, this is a guy who greenlit the process. And I think that even if they trade Montez Sweat and he goes and balls somewhere else for the rest of the year, I think that, to your point, Josh Harris is a guy who's good at operating under known information at the time. And he's not going to, hold it against you if things don't always turn out the right way, except maybe this draft class.
Except for this draft class. But he is a guy who's very big on information, way much. You might have a hard time believing this, but he relies on information way more than the other guy who relied on, yeah, go get him, or no, don't, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, go get
that, that's it. Like he plays quarterback, let me get him, right?
Wow, you're bringing press room bits into the podcast. I love it.
But that is the truth. Like, whereas this guy is operating more from a logic-based decision-making process, and logic suggests if you're 3-5 and you don't look for it, you're committing a bad thing for the franchise.
And I do think that it'll be interesting to know how Josh Harris plays this, because this is his first arguably big opportunity to put his thumb on the scale if he wants to. Obviously, the last guy did that a lot. Josh has a track record of his organizations of letting his people, do their thing, hiring really strong, basketball executives in terms of Daryl Morey and things like that in hockey as well. But how is he going to approach Washington? And especially when, you have a really large ownership group. Magic Johnson is out there tweeting every week. I mean,
oh, really?
Yeah. Like I'm curious how Josh and Mitch Rales and Mark Ein and all those other guys, will they put their thumbs on the scale? And if so, how much?
There you go. That's it. I got nothing more on that unless you do. That's good talk there. Anyways, and besides, so Mary Fortier knows his nuggets and mac and cheese are almost done. So I got to get him out for supper. So I appreciate you, Sam, for joining me. I appreciate you guys for listening. I'll be back on Friday/Saturday morning with my Keys prediction to the Commanders Eagles. Talk to you next time.